Maya Williams had always been a woman who exuded confidence. As the CEO of one of the largest banks in the city, she had worked hard to climb the corporate ladder. She was no stranger to challenges, having faced many obstacles in her career, especially as a black woman in a predominantly white, male-dominated industry. But today was different. Today, Maya walked into her own bank branch, determined to make a personal withdrawal a simple, everyday task. What she didn't expect was the moment that would shake her confidence to its core. The branch was busy, but not overwhelmingly so. It was a bright, sunny Tuesday morning, and Maya had planned this visit to the bank to handle some personal financial matters. As she walked in, she noticed the usual hustle and bustle of her employees' bank tellers dealing with clients, managers discussing reports, and a few customers seated in the waiting area. But what she didn't notice was how different things felt today. Maya was always someone who kept a sharp eye on her surroundings. But this time, her thoughts were elsewhere. She was thinking about the big deal she had closed earlier that week, and the pressure to maintain her position as a leader in the industry. She knew that in her role she had to keep proving herself every day. She had worked tirelessly to earn the respect of her colleagues and employees. And despite her success, she knew how fragile that respect could be. But today, none of that seemed to matter. What mattered now was a simple transaction. She approached the teller, who greeted her with a polite smile, but Maya could sense something was off. The teller, a young woman named Sarah, hesitated as Maya handed over her request of withdrawal for a substantial amount of money. It wasn't an unusual request for someone in her position, but Sarah seemed nervous. "Is everything all right, Sarah?" Maya asked, trying to put her at ease. Sarah nodded, but her hands trembled as she began typing the transaction into the system. Maya could tell something wasn't right. The delay was becoming uncomfortable. After a few minutes of silence, Sarah finally looked up, her face pale. "I'm sorry, Ms. Williams, but I'm unable to process your withdrawal today," she said, her voice shaky. Maya's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean you can't process it?" Sarah avoided eye contact, glancing nervously over at her supervisor. "There seems to be an issue with your account. It's a system error. I'm not sure what happened, but I'm afraid I can't authorize the transaction." Maya's mind raced. This wasn't a small issue, it was a personal transaction she had been planning for some time. And the idea that a system error was the cause didn't sit right with her. She had been with the bank long enough to know that such errors were rare, especially when it came to high-profile clients like herself. "Sarah, I think you need to check again," Maya said, her voice calm but firm. "I don't think this is just a system error. I am the CEO of this bank. I need you to process the transaction now." Sarah looked helpless. She fidgeted with her pen, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "I'm sorry, Ms. Williams. I just... I don't know what's happening." At this point, Maya's patience was wearing thin. She glanced around the bank, and for the first time, she felt the weight of the stares from her staff. She could see them whispering to each other, casting furtive glances her way. Something was wrong. This wasn't just a mistake. Maya could feel the subtle tension in the air, the undercurrent of discrimination that had followed her for years. She had seen it in boardrooms, at networking events, and now, here it was. In her own bank, it was then that Maya decided to escalate the situation. She asked Sarah to call over the branch manager. Richard Hayes, the bank's branch manager, was an older man in his late 50s, well-dressed in his sharp suit. Maya had worked with him for years, and while they didn't always see eye to eye, she respected him as a competent manager. But today, when he walked over with a stiff smile and a neutral expression, Maya felt a surge of anger. "Richard, what's going on here?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Richard seemed taken aback, but his expression quickly turned into one of professional concern. "Ms. Williams, I'm afraid there's a technical issue with the system. We're still investigating it, but it's causing delays with some transactions. I'll get it resolved right away." Maya's eyes narrowed. The more Richard spoke, the more she felt a sense of unease creeping in. It wasn't just the system error. It was the way everyone was acting. It was an undercurrent of discomfort, of hesitation. She took a deep breath, trying to keep her composure. Richard, this isn't about a technical issue. This is about respect. I am the CEO of this bank, and I expect to be treated with the same respect as any other client. Richard hesitated for a moment before speaking. Of course, Ms. Williams, but you know how these systems work. We just need to follow protocol. Protocol, Maya repeated, her voice now rising slightly. This is not about protocol. This is about discrimination. I've been the target of this for years, and I will not stand for it any longer. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Richard looked around the room, clearly uncomfortable. Maya could sense the eyes of an entire staff on her. But this time, she wasn't going to back down. I'm not going to let you deny me access to my own money, she said, her voice steady and strong. I'm not going to let you deny me what's rightfully mine. At that moment, Maya knew she had reached a breaking point. The situation had become bigger than just a financial transaction. It had become a statement, a challenge to the discrimination she had faced throughout her career. She realized that this wasn't just a mistake or an isolated incident. This was part of a larger pattern of biases, and it was something she could no longer ignore. Maya stood there, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on her chest. The usual hum of the bank seemed distant, almost muffled, as if the world had narrowed to just the three of them, her, Richard, and Sarah. The air felt thick with tension, an undercurrent of something far more serious than a simple banking error. She had always been able to read people, to feel the subtle signs of discomfort, and right now, there was a lot of it. But what made this situation particularly insidious wasn't just the lack of respect. It was the deep-rooted feeling of being undermined, of being invisible in a place where she should have felt at home. Her thoughts swirled as she stood in the center of the bank, eyes locked on Richard. This wasn't just about a transaction. This was about more than the money. It was a matter of control. For years, Maya had built a career where every decision she made was scrutinized. Every move had to be calculated, every word had to carry weight. She had worked harder than anyone to climb the corporate ladder, to break through the invisible barriers that kept talented people like her from rising. But today, in her own bank, those same barriers reared their ugly heads once again. The feeling was familiar, but that didn't make it any easier to accept. Richard, fumbling for an answer, shifted on his feet. The air between them seemed to thicken as Maya waited for him to speak. She could hear her heart beat in her ears, a steady, almost rhythmic thumping as her frustration grew. But she held her ground, unwilling to let her emotions get the better of her. This wasn't just about her. This was about setting a precedent, about ensuring that future generations of employees, regardless of their race, would never have to endure what she had. You're telling me that because of a technical issue, I can't access my own account? Is that what you're saying? Maya's voice was calm, controlled, but there was an edge to it that sent a clear message. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a moment of reckoning. Richard's face reddened, but he remained silent for a moment. Clearly uncomfortable under the weight of her gaze, he adjusted his glasses, his eyes darting nervously around the room. The longer he hesitated, the more Maya's anger began to simmer beneath the surface. She had always prided herself on being patient, on staying calm, even when others lost their heads. But this was a step too far, Ms. Williams. It's not what you think, Richard began, his voice trembling slightly. Then tell me what I think, Maya interrupted sharply. Because right now it feels like you're saying that my status as the CEO doesn't matter. It feels like you're telling me that I'm just another customer, just another person who has to jump through hoops to get what's mine. And I'm not having it. I won't tolerate it. Richard's face shifted from discomfort to defensiveness. I didn't mean to. Maya raised a hand, silencing him. No, Richard, you did mean to. Whether you realize it or not, you meant to disrespect me. You meant to make me feel small. And that's not just a simple oversight. It's intentional. You've done this before. The words hung heavy in the air, and for the first time, Richard seemed to truly understand the weight of what he had done. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Maya took a deep breath, her mind racing as she processed the situation. She had worked too hard, fought too many battles, to let someone like him undermine her efforts. Not today. Not anymore. Get me the head of operations, she ordered, her voice unwavering. Now. Richard hesitated for a moment, looking between Maya and the employees around them. But Maya's presence was commanding, and he knew there was no backing down. He nodded stiffly and walked away, his steps slow and uncertain. Maya turned to Sarah, who had been standing quietly by the teller desk, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Sarah," Maya said, her tone softer now, though there was still a sense of firmness in her voice, "I don't blame you. You were just following orders. But you need to understand something. This will not stand. Not here. Not in my bank." Sarah nodded, but her face remained blank, her hands still shaking. Maya couldn't help but feel a twinge of empathy for her. The younger woman was caught in the crossfire, and Maya understood that. But at the same time, she couldn't allow complacency to become the norm. Richard returned shortly, accompanied by the head of operations, Thomas Hayes, Richard's older brother. The two men walked into the lobby with a mix of unease and defensiveness, clearly caught off guard by Maya's level of frustration. Thomas, who was tall and had a more authoritative air about him, didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Ms. Williams, I understand there's been a misunderstanding," Thomas said, his voice smooth but laced with condescension. "We'll have this sorted out immediately," Maya said firmly, cutting him off. "This isn't about sorting out a simple mistake. This is about accountability. This is about respect. It's time I make it clear that I will not allow anyone to undermine me or the people I work with." She paused, letting the words sink in. "This isn't just about today. This is about setting a standard in this organization. And if I have to be the one to do it, then I will." Thomas seemed taken aback, clearly not expecting such a strong response from her. Maya's unwavering tone and presence were enough to silence any further arguments. She had always known how to take control of a room, how to command attention. But today, it wasn't just about the power she held as CEO. It was about something far more personal. It was about breaking the cycle of discrimination that had been quietly woven into the fabric of this institution. "I'm going to make this simple." "Wait," Maya continued. "I'm firing Richard. Effective immediately." The room fell silent. Even the staff who had been watching from afar were now completely still, their eyes wide as they took in the magnitude of what had just been said. Richard's face turned white, the color draining from his skin, as he struggled to comprehend what Maya had just announced. "Ms. Williams, you can't," Richard began, but Maya cut him off again. "I can," she said, her voice icy. "And I am." Richard stood there, his mouth agape, as the weight of the situation finally sank in. Thomas, however, seemed less inclined to accept the decision. "Now wait just a minute," Thomas said, stepping forward. "This is a big decision, and no," Maya interrupted sharply. "I've made my decision. You disagree, you can take it up with the board, but I don't think it will matter. I'm the CEO, and this is my bank." Richard's actions reflect a deeper problem, one that we can no longer ignore. "You're responsible for allowing this to happen, and now it's time for change." Thomas stood there, momentarily stunned. Could feel the tension in the room, the collective energy of the employees who had been quietly observing the situation. Maya had spoken with clarity and authority, and there was no backing down now. "Richard, pack your things," Maya said, with finality. "You're done here." As Richard slowly walked out of the room, his head bowed in shame, Maya couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. She knew that what she had just done would echo throughout the entire organization.
This wasn't
just about Richard. This was about changing the culture, about sending a message that no one, no matter their position, was above the standard of fairness and respect that she demanded. Maya watched Richard leave and then turned her gaze to her employees. She could see the mixed emotions in their eyes: surprise, disbelief, and even admiration. But as Maya looked around the room, she knew one thing for sure. She had made the right call. Maya's heart raced as she stood there in the middle of her office, the door now closed behind her. The moment was far from over. Richard's departure was just the beginning. As much as her decision to fire him had been decisive and necessary, she knew there were deeper issues at play, issues that extended far beyond one man's actions. The more Maya thought about it, the more she realized this wasn't simply a problem within the bank. It was a reflection of a larger systemic issue that spanned every corner of the financial industry, and perhaps even the corporate world as a whole. The moment Richard walked out, Maya's thoughts shifted. She had just taken one step in asserting her authority, but now she needed to focus on what would come next. There was no time to relax. There was no time to bask in the satisfaction of her decision. She had set a new precedent, and now it was up to her to ensure that it lasted. The bank needed more than just a reshuffling of personnel. It needed a cultural overhaul. Maya's mind worked quickly, the weight of the situation settling deeper into her chest. There could be no half measures. Thomas, still reeling from the sudden dismissal of his brother, lingered near the door. Maya's eyes locked onto his. He didn't speak, but she could see the disbelief etched on his face. He wasn't used to being challenged. In fact, few people in the bank had ever really dared to question the authority of those at the top. But Maya wasn't like the others. She didn't see herself as merely an executive. She saw herself as a leader, a symbol of what could be accomplished with grit, determination, and an unwavering commitment to fairness. "I'm not here to make friends, Thomas," Maya said coolly, her voice steady but filled with an undeniable authority. "I'm here to build a culture of respect, integrity, and excellence. If you can't get on board with that, then perhaps this isn't the place for you either." Thomas stiffened. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He had expected. Maya, too, caved to soften her stance, but she hadn't. And in that moment, he knew something had changed. His gaze shifted to the bank's employees standing just outside her office. They were still watching, some with hesitant glances, others with curiosity. Maya had always commanded attention, but now it was different. She wasn't just another CEO in the room. She was a force, and everyone knew it. "Thomas," Maya continued, taking a step closer, "it's not just about one incident, not just about one bad manager. It's about a culture that has been allowed to persist unchecked for too long. We've let complacency slip through our ranks, and I'm not going to stand for it anymore. You may have been okay with it, but I'm not." Thomas finally found his voice, though it trembled with a hint of uncertainty. "You can't just change everything overnight. Maya, you're making a decision that could affect everything, the reputation of the bank. The people who have worked here for years. You can't just—" "I can," Maya interrupted, her voice quiet but firm, "and I will." There was a moment of silence as Maya looked him in the eyes, willing him to understand the gravity of her words. The battle had already been won in her mind. She had made the decision. But now, it was about ensuring that everyone in this room, in this bank, understood it as well. They had to see that this wasn't just a personal vendetta, a rash decision based on a single act of disrespect. It was a stand for something bigger, something more profound. It was about breaking the cycles of bias and inequality that had plagued corporate cultures for generations. Maya's mind drifted back to the years of hard work that had led her to this moment. She thought about the sleepless nights, the countless hours spent proving her worth. There had been moments, countless moments, when she had been doubted, dismissed, overlooked. She had been told she was too ambitious, too vocal, too everything. But Maya had never let those words define her. She had pushed harder, proven them wrong, and now she was sitting at the head of a multi-billion-dollar institution. Earned her place, and no one, especially not someone like Richard, was going to take that away from her. "So what now?" Thomas asked, his voice still shaking slightly. "We rebuild," Maya said, standing tall. "And we do it the right way. We put systems in place that not only prevent this from happening again, but that also foster an environment where respect and fairness are the cornerstone of everything we do." Maya paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. "Want this to be just about what happened today? This is about creating a culture where everyone, from the CEO to the janitor, feels valued. Where no one feels less than because of the color of their skin, their gender, or any other reason. If we want to lead this industry, we need to lead by example. And that starts with me, and it starts today." Thomas stood there, speechless, as Maya's words resonated in the room. The employees who had gathered outside her office were now listening intently. Maya could feel their eyes on her, some in awe, some in doubt, but all of them were paying attention. This was a moment that would shape the future of the entire organization, and Maya was determined that it would be a turning point. "Thomas," Ass said, her voice softer now, but still with an underlying firmness, "I want you to understand something. This decision wasn't personal. It wasn't about Richard being a bad person. It was about his behavior, about the culture he represented, and it's something we can't tolerate anymore." Thomas nodded slowly, still processing everything. He was the one in charge of the branch's operations, and now his leadership had been called into question. He had always prided himself on being a steady force in the organization, but Maya's uncompromising stance was a reminder that power, real power, was not about maintaining the status quo. It was about driving change, even when it was uncomfortable. "I'll support you, Maya," Thomas finally said, his voice low. "But you need to understand that this is going to take time. Can't expect everything to fall into place overnight." Maya gave him a nod, her expression softening for the first time. "I understand. Change is never easy, but it's necessary. And I'm not going to back down. Not now, not ever." As Thomas left her office, Maya sat back in her chair, her mind racing with the enormity of the task ahead. But she didn't feel overwhelmed. No, she felt something stronger: determination. The decision had been made, and now it was time to act on it. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, pushback, and moments when it would feel like she was fighting an uphill battle. But Maya knew one thing for sure: she wasn't backing down. She had fought too hard to get here, and now it was time to build the future she had always envisioned, a future where respect and fairness weren't just buzzwords, but the very foundation of the organization. Maya Williams sat behind her. Sleek, glass desk, the weight of the day's events slowly settling in. The energy in the air was different, now charged with something undeniable. She had made a powerful statement, one that could either dismantle or redefine the culture of her organization. The moment Richard had walked out of her office, she had crossed a threshold. There was no going back now. No more hiding behind corporate pleasantries or waiting for things to magically improve. The decision had been made, and the road ahead was one of transformation. It was hers to lead, but it would require every ounce of her strength, resilience, and vision to make it a reality. The phone on her desk buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from her assistant. "Meeting in 30 minutes with the HR team and upper management. Your presence is required." Maya nodded to herself, already preparing for what would come next. This meeting would set the tone for everything that followed. It was time to start the hard work of rebuilding, and it wasn't going to be easy. The question wasn't whether she could handle the pressure, it was whether the rest of her team was ready for the kind of change she was bringing. Maya knew that some would resist. Some would cling to the old ways, the systems of complacency, and the comfort of knowing that power and privilege could go unchecked. But Maya was done with comfort. She was done with the quiet tolerance of mediocrity. This was the turning point, and she had to make sure her vision was clear, that the rest of the bank understood what it meant for them. As she walked into the conference room, she could feel the eyes of her senior leadership team on her. They were all seated around the large, polished table, some with concerned expressions, others clearly more curious than worried. Maya didn't waste time. She closed the door behind her and stood at the head of the table. I could feel the power of the moment, the calm before the storm of questions that would soon follow. But she wasn't nervous. She had already made her decision. Now it was time to share it with them. "Thank you for joining me on such short notice," Maya began, her voice steady, projecting authority but with an openness that invited dialogue. "As many of you know, earlier today I made the decision to fire Richard Hayes. This was not a decision I made lightly, but one that was necessary for the future of this organization." The room remained silent. Maya's eyes scanned the table, meeting the gaze of each individual present. The HR director, Anna, was the first to speak. Ms. Williams, we all understand the need to address issues of inequality and bias, but firing someone of Richard's tenure, especially so abruptly, is drastic. He's been with the company for over 20 years. This could have a ripple effect on morale, Anna said, her voice trembling slightly, as if unsure whether she was speaking up in defense of Richard or out of a genuine concern for Maya's leadership. I understand the concern, Anna, Maya replied, her voice measured. But what happened today was not just a single mistake. It was a symptom of a much larger issue. Richard's actions reflected a culture we've allowed to exist here for too long. Okay, a culture that says one thing while practicing something entirely different. We cannot afford to continue down that path, not when we're trying to create something better for everyone. Maya's words hung in the air like a challenge, and the tension in the room deepened. Richard's dismissal had sent shockwaves through the bank, but Maya had expected this reaction. It was natural. Change wasn't easy. People were uncomfortable when their established norms were disrupted. But Maya knew this discomfort was necessary, was part of the process. The reality is, we've ignored the deep-seated biases that have shaped this institution for far too long, Maya continued, her tone gaining strength. It's not enough to offer diversity training or to talk about inclusion at board meetings. We have to live it. We have to breathe it into every corner of this organization, from the executive level all the way down to the front lines. Need to ensure that every employee, regardless of their position, feels safe, respected, and empowered to bring their full selves to work every day. I want this bank to reflect the values we claim to uphold. But if we don't address this at the core, we are just paying lip service. There was a pause. Maya's words were sinking in. She could see the gears turning in the minds of the executives seated around the table. Some nodded, their expressions thoughtful, while others seemed to recoil slightly, uncertain about the scale of the changes Maya was proposing. But Maya wasn't looking for unanimous approval. She was looking for action. We're not here to maintain the status quo, Maya said, leaning forward, her voice rising with urgency. We're here to change it. We're here to create a space where people can thrive, where every employee has an equal opportunity to succeed. I've seen what happens when we allow inequality to persist. I've seen the damage it does to individuals, to teams, and to the bottom line. And I won't be complicit in that anymore. Anna shifted in her seat, visibly uncomfortable but trying to regain her composure. But Ms. Williams, with all due respect, Richard wasn't the only problem. If we're going to make this kind of change, we need a comprehensive strategy. We need new policies, new systems. This isn't something we can just do with one decision, I know, Maya said calmly. And that's why I'm calling on all of you to help me lead this transformation. This can't just come from the top down. It has to be a collective effort. We need to audit every aspect of our organization, from hiring practices to promotions to our customer-facing interactions. We need to ask ourselves hard questions about how we treat people, how we view talent, and how we hold ourselves accountable. If we don't do this, we're going to lose the trust of our employees, our clients, and the public. The room fell silent again. There was a quiet urgency in Maya's words, but more than that, there was a clarity. She knew what needed to be done, and she was determined to see it through. The challenge ahead would be formidable, but Maya had never been one to shy away from a challenge. This was her chance to make a lasting impact, not just for herself, but for the entire organization. I want everyone here to take a hard look at what we've been doing. Ask yourselves if it's enough. Ask yourselves if we've been doing everything we can to foster an environment of true equity. If we've been living up to the values we say we hold dear, Maya said, her voice softening as she concluded. I'm not going to do this alone. I'm asking for your help because we can't change the system without changing the people who run it. This will be a long process, but if we don't start today, we'll be perpetuating the same systems that have held us back for years. As Maya looked around the room, she saw something that hadn't been there before. It was a flicker of understanding, a recognition that things couldn't remain the same. There were no more excuses, no more waiting for change to happen. The time for transformation was now. We'll work together on a strategy, Anna said, her tone more conciliatory now, and ensure that this isn't just a reactionary move, but a sustained effort to reshape our entire approach. Maya nodded. Good, we start today. As the meeting concluded and the executives slowly filed out, Maya sat back in her chair, taking a moment to collect her thoughts. She had made the right decision. Richard was just the first step. Now the real work began. The days that followed Richard's firing were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and planning sessions. Maya had expected some level of pushback, but what she didn't anticipate was how much of it would come from within her own team. Her decision to take a stand against the culture of complacency in her bank had reverberated throughout every department. The ripple effect was undeniable. What began as an isolated incident had evolved into a movement that threatened to disrupt everything the bank had stood for. But for Maya, this was exactly what was needed. Change was uncomfortable. It was messy. It was often met with resistance. But it was also necessary. And as uncomfortable as it was, she was ready to see it through. Maya had set the tone for what was to come, a complete overhaul of the bank's culture. The challenge was now to ensure that the momentum didn't fade, that the fire she had ignited didn't sputter out before it could fully take hold. She needed to solidify her vision and ensure that every single person in the organization understood what was at stake. It wasn't just about Richard. It was about the future of the entire company. It was about creating an environment where respect, fairness, and inclusion were not just buzzwords, but the very foundation of the institution. It was late on a Thursday afternoon when Maya sat down with her senior leadership team again. The stakes were higher now. She could feel the tension in the air as they filed into the conference room, the uncertainty lingering in every step they took. This was no longer a conversation about a single incident. This was about the future of the bank. And Maya knew she had to make her intentions crystal clear. "I've asked you all here because it's time to make decisions," Maya said, her voice steady and authoritative. "We've taken the first step with Richard, but now we have to ensure that this is more than a one-off. We have to make sure that we're not just paying lip service to change, but actually embodying it." The room was quiet, the weight of her words hanging heavily in the air. The executives sat around the table, some with furrowed brows, others nervously glancing at each other. Maya could sense their hesitation. She had known from the start that the transformation she was about to undertake wouldn't be easy. But she was prepared for the hard work ahead. She had come too far to back down now. "This is about more than just eliminating racism," Maya continued, her tone unwavering. "It's about creating a culture that values every individual. It's about breaking down the walls that have kept people from rising to their full potential. If we want to be a leader in this industry, we can't afford to ignore the systemic issues that have been plaguing us for years. We need to rebuild from the ground up, and we need to do it together." The room shifted uncomfortably. The HR director, Anna, spoke up first, her voice hesitant but measured. "Maya, I agree with you. We need change. But this is going to take time. A lot of time. You can't just expect everyone to fall in line immediately." Maya nodded, understanding the concern. "I know it won't be instant, but it has to start today. We need to create a comprehensive plan, an actionable plan that addresses every part of our organization. This is about more than diversity training or workshops. It's about creating new systems, new ways of thinking, new ways of operating." The chief financial officer, Alan, cleared his throat. "You're talking about a complete cultural shift, Maya. That's not something we can just implement overnight. What are we going to do about the people who are resistant to this change? How do we ensure that this doesn't fall apart before we even get started?" Maya met Alan's gaze, her eyes steely with resolve. "We hold people accountable. We lead by example. This is not optional. Anyone who is resistant to change will be held accountable. I'm not asking for everyone to be on board immediately, but I am asking for them to respect the process and be part of it. If they can't do that, then they won't be part of this organization anymore." The room grew quiet again, and Maya could feel the weight of her words settling in. This was not just about changing the policies. It was about changing the mindset of every individual who worked for the bank. It was about making sure that no one could hide behind ignorance or complacency anymore. "I want a plan on my desk by the end of next week," Maya continued. "It has to be detailed. It has to be actionable. and it has to start with accountability. We need to establish clear metrics for measuring diversity, equity, and inclusion at every level of the bank. We need to ensure that our hiring processes are transparent, that our promotions are based on merit, not favoritism, and that we are holding everyone to the same standards. As the meeting continued, Maya outlined her vision for the future of the bank. She spoke about creating mentorship programs for underrepresented groups, about ensuring that all employees had access to the same opportunities regardless of their race, gender, or background. She talked about auditing the bank's policies, from hiring practices to employee retention strategies, and implementing changes that would make the bank a model for inclusivity in the financial industry. By the time the meeting ended, there was a palpable shift in the room. It wasn't a shift towards complete agreement, but it was a shift towards recognition. Maya's vision was clear, and while there were still questions and concerns to address, the sense of urgency was now shared by everyone in the room. They knew that this was a pivotal moment. There was no turning back now. As the executives filed out of the room, Maya sat back in her chair, exhausted but determined. She had made the decision to lead this transformation, and now she was going to see it through. But she knew that the road ahead would be full of obstacles. There would be resistance from both inside and outside the organization. There would be people who doubted her, people who questioned her motives, and people who tried to undermine her at every turn. But Maya was ready for all of it. She had fought too hard, come too far, to let anything or anyone stand in her. Way later that night, as she sat alone in her office, Maya reflected on everything she had done so far. The path she had chosen wasn't going to be easy. Nothing worth doing ever was. She had started a fire, and now it was her job to make sure it didn't burn out. She thought about Richard, about the decision to fire him, and about the countless moments in her career where she had been forced to prove herself, where she had been doubted because of her race, her gender, her ambition. But she wasn't going to prove herself to anyone anymore. She'd already done that. Now she was going to change the game. Maya stood up from her desk and walked over to the window, looking out over the city. The lights twinkled in the distance, a symbol of the world that was still out there waiting for her to conquer it. She knew that what she was doing wasn't just about transforming her bank, it was about transforming the industry. She had the power to change things, to make a difference. She wasn't going to waste that opportunity. As she gazed out into the night, Maya made a vow to herself. She would not back down. She would see this through, no matter how long it took. This was just the beginning. Maya sat at her desk, staring at the cityscape outside her office window. The sun had set hours ago, leaving the skyline bathed in the golden hues of streetlights and the faint reflection of the moon. It was quiet now, the office empty except for a few late-night workers scattered across the floors. It had been a long day, a long week, a long battle, but Maya knew that the hard part was only just beginning. The moment she had dismissed Richard from his position had sparked a chain reaction. The ripple effect had already reached the furthest corners of the bank. Employees were whispering in the hallways, speculating on the reasons behind her drastic move. There were murmurs of support, of admiration, but also whispers of doubt, of resistance. Some feared the cultural shift Maya was bringing. Others believed it was a necessary purge. It was clear that change was coming, but the question was, who would stay and who would leave? As the hours passed, Maya worked late into the night, revising documents, drafting memos, preparing for the presentations and meetings she knew were on the horizon. There were plans to put into motion initiatives that would reshape the very fabric of the organization. And she knew she would need all her energy, all her resolve, to see it through. There would be obstacles, as there always were when you challenged the status quo. But this time, Maya wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. She had come too far to back down now. The following day was a blur of meetings and decisions. Maya had already scheduled a company-wide address to speak directly to all employees. She wanted to make it clear that this was not just about one person, not just about Richard, but about the future of the entire institution. The changes she was introducing were bigger than any single individual. They were about creating a space where everyone, from the executives to the entry-level employees, felt valued and empowered. It was about building an organization where diversity and inclusion weren't just ideals, but lived realities. But as Maya entered the conference room for the address, she noticed something unusual. The room was packed. There were employees from every department sitting shoulder to shoulder, waiting for her to speak. Maya hadn't expected such a turnout, but she knew this was a critical moment. This was the opportunity to lay out her vision for the future and to let her team know exactly what was at stake. She stood before the crowd, her presence commanding attention. The murmurs quieted as the room fell silent, all eyes on her.
Maya
Could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just another speech. This was her chance to redefine what it meant to work at this bank. It was her chance to rewrite the story of the institution. "Good morning, everyone," Maya began, her voice calm but filled with purpose. "I know that many of you have been questioning what's been happening recently. I know that some of you are uncertain about the future of this company, and that's understandable. Change is never easy, but it is necessary. And I am here today to tell you that the change we're making is for the better for all of us." She paused, allowing her words to settle in the air. The tension in the room was palpable. She could sense the curiosity, the uncertainty, the skepticism, but also the hope. People wanted change. They were just afraid of what it would mean for them. Maya continued, her voice steady. "I made the decision to let Richard go because I believe in something greater than the status quo. I believe in the values that we say we stand for: respect, fairness, integrity. And I will not allow anyone, regardless of their position or tenure, to undermine those values." This decision wasn't personal. It wasn't about one individual. It was about ensuring that this bank is a place where everyone has the opportunity to thrive, where everyone is given a fair chance to succeed. The room was silent for a moment, and then she heard a soft murmur of approval. It wasn't loud, but it was there, an acknowledgement of the truth in her words. Maya knew that she had just taken the first step in winning over the hearts and minds of her employees. It was going to take time, but she was willing to put in the work. "We are at a crossroads," Maya continued. "This is a moment in time where we can either choose to stay stuck in the past, clinging to outdated practices, or we can choose to evolve. We can choose to be the kind of organization that leads, that sets the standard, that creates a culture where every single employee is respected, valued, and empowered." She looked out over the crowd, her gaze meeting those of employees from all walks of life, young and old, men and women, people of different races, backgrounds, and experiences. Maya knew that the road ahead wouldn't be without its challenges. But she also knew that it was worth fighting for. "The work we do here matters," she said, her voice growing stronger. "We are not just a bank. We are a community. We are a family. And in this family, there is no room for discrimination, no room for bias, and no room for complacency. We are going to build a place where everyone, every single person here can feel proud to work." There was a shift in the room. It was subtle, but Maya could feel it. The tension was slowly dissolving, replaced by something else. It was the beginning of trust. It was the beginning of belief in what they were building together. "Over the next few weeks, we'll be rolling out new initiatives aimed at making this a reality," Maya continued. "We will have new policies for hiring, new systems for ensuring fairness in promotions, and a renewed focus on leadership development. We will be offering training, not just in diversity and inclusion, but in empathy, in communication, and in leadership. We will be holding ourselves accountable, and we will be holding each other accountable." As she spoke, Maya could see the skepticism in some faces begin to fade. The weight of her words, her resolve, was starting to sink in. People weren't just hearing her, they were feeling it. Maya wasn't just talking about change. She was showing them what it would look like, what it would feel like. She wasn't asking them to follow her blindly. She was asking them to join her in creating something better. "Change will be hard," Maya concluded, "but it will be worth it. I am committed to seeing this through, and I hope that all of you will commit to this vision with me. We can't do this alone. We need each and every one of you to help us make this change, to help us make this bank a place where everyone, no matter their background or experience, can thrive." With those words, Maya left the room. The weight of what she had just said hung in the air, but as she walked back to her office, she knew one thing for sure. She had started a fire. It wasn't a fire of anger or resentment, but a fire of change. A fire that could not be extinguished. Later that evening, Maya received an unexpected email. This was from Alan, the chief financial officer. The message was short, but it spoke volumes. "I didn't agree with everything you said today, but I do respect your resolve. Let's talk about the next steps when you're ready." Maya smiled to herself as she read the email. It wasn't a full endorsement, but it was a start. Alan, like many others, had his doubts, but he was willing to have the conversation. And that was all she needed. One conversation at a time. Maya sat back in her chair, feeling a sense of calm wash over her. She had made her decision, and now it was time to move forward. The transformation had begun. The weeks following Maya's address to the company were both exhilarating and exhausting. Her words had sparked something deep within the bank's walls, something that neither she nor anyone else could have predicted. The conversations, the doubts, the pushback, it was all expected. But what she didn't anticipate was how quickly. The conversations started to shift, how the murmurs of resistance began to fade, and how the support she once thought she would have to fight started to materialize organically. Maya was a leader of action, not just words, and she knew that while her speech had been a catalyst for change, it was the actions that followed that would truly define her legacy. The next phase was critical, taking the steps to implement the sweeping cultural shift she had promised. And with each decision, with each policy change, Maya felt the immense responsibility resting on her shoulders. This wasn't just about leading a company. This was about shaping an institution that could inspire others to follow. It started with the hiring practices. Maya had spent hours poring over the bank's recruitment strategies, ensuring that they were transparent, fair, and inclusive. She didn't want the same old patterns of hiring based on favoritism, hidden biases, or outdated norms. Maya worked with HR to implement a blind recruitment process, where resumes were stripped of names, gender, and other potentially biased markers before they were reviewed. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was a crucial step in ensuring that everyone had a fair shot at joining the bank, no matter where they came from or what they looked like. Next, Maya focused on leadership development. She wanted every employee, whether they were in the entry-level positions or in the C-suite, to feel empowered to rise through the ranks. There were weekly training sessions, not just in diversity and inclusion, but also in empathy, communication, and what it meant to be a leader in today's world. She brought in experts, spoke to thought leaders, and even invited employees from across the organization to share their stories. It was about opening the floodgates for conversation, making sure that no voice went unheard. The most significant challenge, however, came in the form of resistance from the old guard, those who had built their careers in the system that Maya was now dismantling. There were whispers, side glances, and long, uncomfortable silences during board meetings. Some of the older executives, those who had been with the bank for decades, were less than thrilled with the changes Maya was making. They didn't understand why the things that had worked for so long, why the practices that had brought them success needed to be uprooted. Maya had prepared herself for this. She knew that no revolution was without its casualties, no transformation without its trials. But what surprised her was how quickly the once steadfast resistance began to fade. Alan, the CFO, was the first to change his tone. After that email exchange, Maya had made an effort to sit down with him. They truly talked for the first time in years. And in that conversation, Alan saw something in Maya that he hadn't before: the depth of her commitment, the sincerity behind her decisions, and the unwavering belief that this was the right path for the bank. He wasn't fully convinced yet, but Maya knew that she had planted a seed, and that was all it took. As the weeks turned into months, the shift became undeniable. Employees from all departments began to step forward with ideas, suggestions, and initiatives that aligned with Maya's vision. As the bank's diversity initiative started to take root, and with that came a sense of community, a sense of shared purpose. The competitive edge the bank had once relied on had been built on profit and status. But now, it was being built on something deeper, a commitment to change, a commitment to fairness, and a commitment to ensuring that everyone had an equal opportunity to succeed. One evening, months after the initial shock of Richard's firing had worn off, Maya stood in the middle of the bustling office floor. She could hear the hum of activity, the chatter of employees collaborating, the sound of phones ringing in the distance. But it wasn't just the noise of a busy workplace that Maya was listening. To it was the sound of change. She could feel it in the energy of the people around her, in the way they worked together, in the way they supported one another. Maya had always known that her journey would not be easy. She had known that there would be bumps along the way, moments when she would question whether the struggle was worth it. But now, standing in the heart of her bank, Maya saw it all coming to life. The legacy she had set out to create was unfolding before her eyes. It was far more beautiful than she could have imagined. But even as the winds of change blew strong within the organization, Maya knew that the hardest part of the journey was still ahead. There would be setbacks, there would be resistance, and there would be moments when her resolve would be tested. But that was okay. She'd already faced so much more, and she had come out stronger on the other side. The true measure of her success, Maya realized, wasn't just in how much change she had brought to the bank, it was in how much more there was to do. She had started something, but the journey was never really going to end. It would take years, maybe decades, to build a culture that could withstand the test of time. And even then, Maya knew there would always be work to be done. Because in the end, leadership wasn't about finishing the race. It was about running it every single day, setting the example, and inspiring others to do the same. The next morning, Maya received a surprise email from one of the bank's largest investors, a man she had met only a handful of times, but who had been an integral part of the bank's success over the years. The email was short, but it was enough to make Maya pause. Maya, I wanted to personally thank you for the changes you've made. I was skeptical at first, but after seeing the results, I have no doubt that this is the right path for the bank. You're doing something rare, something that's going to make a lasting impact, not just on your company, but on the entire industry. Keep going. Maya sat back in her chair, taking a moment to digest the words. It was a small acknowledgement, but it meant more to her than she could explain. It was the validation she had needed, a reminder that what she was doing was not just about herself or her bank. It was about creating a legacy of fairness, a legacy of leadership, and a legacy of change that would ripple out into the world. As Maya hit reply and typed out her response, she realized that the real work wasn't just about making the decisions that led to this moment. It was about maintaining the momentum, about ensuring that the values she had worked so hard to instill in her organization continued to live on long after she was gone. The bank had been built on the foundation of numbers, of profits, of acquisitions. But now, it was built on something far more powerful. People. Now, Maya realized was the true legacy of her work. She hit send on her response, then sat back in her chair, gazing out at the city skyline once more. The world outside seemed to stretch endlessly, full of potential, full of possibilities. Maya, for the first time in a long while, felt a quiet sense of peace. She had done it. And the journey was just beginning.